on August the 5th, 2009. Newcomers, look into cuttingthroughthematrix.com website. Look at all the other sites I have up there on the front page. Bookmark them for future use, because at some time in the future I'll have trouble with the main servers. This way you can always have another site you can download from, and all the audios from. You've got cuttingthrough.jenkness.com, cuttingthroughthematrix.net.us.ca. There's also Alan Watt, cuttingthroughthematrix.ca, and Alan Watt Sentinel.eu. The last one is the European site, which has all the same audios for download, but it also has a lot of transcripts for print up, written in the various languages of Europe. And for those who want to try their hands at translating, get in touch with me at alanwattcuttingthrough@yahoo.com. Now, for those who listen regularly, I thank you. For those who donate, I should say, because lots of people, thousands and thousands of people listen, and the stuff's spread all over the planet so fast, and many others copy up the stuff and take it and run with it, and I don't hear from them. So there's lots out there that use the material. There's even authors they've written books using this kind of material, and I seem to be the only one that's dependent upon a handful of people to constantly keep me going by donations and so on. Now, to help me along, you can go into cuttingthroughthematrix.com, see the books, etc. I have for sale. That will help keep me ticking over, and donations as well. Within the US and Canada, you can use PayPal, you can use personal checks. Outside the Americas, you can use Western Union. There's MoneyGram as well. And some inventive people just send cash. But however it's done, I need the cash to keep going. It's expensive to keep all this stuff running. And believe you me, it's not something I would pick for a career or a job. It's just something that has to be done at this time. And for those who just get the disc passed around, there's lots of people who don't like computer, and so other folk with computers can burn discs for them and pass them around. You can always get in touch with me at Alan Watt, site 41, Box 4, Estaire, Ontario, Canada. Estaire is E-S-T-A-I-R-E, Ontario, Canada. P as in Peter, 3, E as in Elizabeth, 4, N as in Nora, 1. P3E4N1. But see, this isn't a job, this is a necessity, because we truly are going through, not my words, but the elites themselves, they've said that this is the biggest change we're up against, the biggest change since the Industrial Revolution, maybe even bigger, because it's a time when so many plans are brought together, plans that have been sort of stashed away on the top shelves at elites' private conference rooms and so on, and their private clubs where they've discussed all of these issues, and they're all to the forefront today in mainstream media. Why is that? Because now is the time for change, this century of change. Changes which we will not like whatsoever, very dictatorial type of changes as well. There's no democracy involved. In fact, the elite said themselves at the Club of Rome that they would bypass all democracy. Democracy was too cumbersome, there were too many competing parties, and nothing could get done. And of course, these boys at the top know what they want to get done, and democracy is simply in the way. Therefore, you simply bring in a new system where it's called governance. Governance is a term that's used, and governance is truly an order from the top down society, a structural society, but they'll keep the pretense of democracy, some kind of facade going for quite some time yet. But anyone who's got half a brain left can tell that we're under a completely different type of system already. I'll be back with more after this break, to an old audio of Aldous Huxley talking to Mike Wallace on an old TV show. And I'll dig it up at the end of the night and put it up on my site. Again, although it's already in the archive section. And it's interesting when you look at people like Aldous Huxley, who was brought up in the high circles of science, mainly, again, his particular field and his ancestry too. Their fields were into what makes people sick, what makes you, and in finding ways of modifying individual people to create a perfect type of society. That was always the leaning of the Huxleys. And they go all the way back to Sir Thomas Huxley, who championed Darwin. He was the best pal of Charles Darwin. They both belonged to the Royal Society, that the high Freemasonic scientific society that still runs Britain yet in the Scientific League. And they really wanted to design a new society, even back in Darwin's day. Under the guise of evolution, of course, they have to destroy all religions and replace it with this new religion of evolution. And believe you me, when you really look into what they give you as facts, you need an awful lot of faith to believe in it. It truly is a religion. And yet it's taught as a fact in all scientific circles today and all universities. You'll be ostracized if you don't agree with it and you try to attend science lectures in university. That's how bad things really are. We don't live under any kind of a free system where you can have opinions. That's the beauty of liberalism, where they say that everything's relative and everybody's opinion matters and is just as equally as valid as anybody else's contrary opinion, except when you disagree with their opinions at the top of the Liberal Party, because they will tolerate nothing else except their own opinion, you see. That's the beauty of liberalism. It pretends to be this champion of freedom, but in reality, if you just look at the Soviet system, now the Chinese system, it's truly completely intolerant of anybody else's opinion. But that particular audio made me think about Huxley, Aldous Huxley himself, the brother of Julian. Julian was more open about the agenda than Aldous. Aldous simply wrote most of it in novel form, like Brave New World, although he did Brave New World Revisited, which really explained why this could indeed happen. And really there was nothing to stop it, in other words. He tells you why. And there's also his old audio that he did at Berkeley. I'll find that link as well. But the Mike Wallace interview was interesting because it made me think, I said, this man has grown up in the aristocracy of Britain, the Guardian class, as they call themselves. Sometimes they call themselves the Olympians. You know? And they truly believe that it's their rights as the privileged class to run the world. That was the old British precept that's never really changed. And in the circles that Huxley was raised, growing up, he heard talks which he'd never hear mentioned in any newspaper on the planet. Talks about the people, the place of the people. Inferior gene types were discussed back when Huxley was young. Before that, his father was talking about inferior humors. They thought it was a strange humor you had, and then they found the gene later on, and, well, it's bad genes, you see. But always finding a way to try and separate themselves, validate the separateness of themselves and the lower classes. And being elitist always, and planners with pull in governments. And people don't realize a lot of pull that occurs within governments comes from outside of governments. It comes from what Huxley called the dominant minority. The dominant minority don't run for politics. They tell politicians what to do. That's just a fact of life. But when you see him in the Mike Wallace interview, you remember too that he's been trained and brought up to be trained to remember always to whom he's talking. And he's talking to an American audience. Therefore, he's holding back, he's making it palatable what he has to say to the American audience by saying, well, this could happen. And he does give some valid illustrations like the Soviet system. He explains really what it is, and we all know what it really is. The Soviet system was run by a dominant minority of elites. Intergenerationally, their families inherited the same positions. The KGB, for instance, was always intergenerational. You got your sons and your daughters into it. That went right through its whole era. Intergenerational families. But the same with the top guys up in the Politburo and the bureaucracies. That's how it was run. And he also said they lived in a comparative living standards with the Western world. These high-level bureaucrats, they had lots of money and lots of goodies to buy that the public couldn't get a hold of. and had a very comfortable lifestyle. So therefore, it used a front of equality so that a small elite could dominate and live well off the public, which wasn't much different than the system really in the West when you think about it. And as I say, remember, he's putting this for an American audience. This same man had participated in high-level think tanks that literally planned the future. They already planned the future. So when he's talking about this could happen here, and that under the guise of helping people, especially in a society with vast communication, like television coming in, a small minority could take over the minds of millions of people, especially, as I said, if it went the same way as the Soviets, where you just, no matter what station you turned on, you heard the same propaganda. He said it'd be so easy to control millions and millions of people. So although he's saying as a warning, he was also well aware that he and his kin to come would be using these techniques on the people of the West. Because Huxley and others were well aware of the Soviet experiment, more aware than other people. These are the guys who traveled over there to study it, you see, to see how it was working. And remember, the Club of Rome were the ones who said that they favored communitarianism or the collectivism of what they meant was the Soviet system to run the world. That's what they planned. So in other words, the elite of the West were going to use the Soviet system down the road in the future, which is here, a socialized world, to best rule over the people. They actually admired how they ruled the people and managed the people. That ties exactly in with the Reece Commission, with what Norman Dodds, sent out by the Congress to investigate the tax-free foundations, was told by the CEO of Ford and Carnegie and Rockefeller, etc., their job was to alter culture so much in the West that it would blend seamlessly with the Soviet system down the road, which here we are. It's here, you see. They've merged into one. Planned that way. So Huxley was well aware when he was giving that Mike Wallace interview of where it was supposed to go. But they couldn't tell the public because the public weren't supposed to know that. We were still supposed to think we were fighting a Cold War and all that kind of stuff. Everyone talks about the Soviets, and they don't talk about China. Why is that? Well, it's because, you see, under the GATT Treaty, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, which really gave power for trading into a star chamber, literally a star chamber, a private star chamber decides who can trade with whom. All grievances between countries go through this star chamber. There's no jury. And China was awarded the most favorable trading nation status by Britain, the US, and all the other countries. China is a communist country. And once again, to show you the tricks of time and the tricks of creating fronts and perceptions in people, and again, even using the example of George Orwell's Animal Farm, where he's at the end of Animal Farm, the humans meet the rebel animals, and the pigs, of course, lead the animals. And the humans, the farmers, say to the pigs, "What a fantastic job you've done. We've been trying to get the animals to work for free for years." Well, see, that was the explanation of the Soviet system. And that's what's coming in here. But China also, as I say, is run on that same system. You have a small elite on top. And I don't know if people realize how wealthy this small elite happen to be. I've seen magazines with these massive estates. They're copying the old English estates where you have a sort of castle-type affair with 400 or 500 rooms, and they've got Greek statues on the top and all this kind of stuff, and they've got the grounds laid out like the 18th century estates of Europe and England. And incredible wealth that you cannot imagine. But these are very old families. Old families that actually went through the communist era and still held on to power and still run China today. But isn't it odd that we supposedly went through an awful, awful era, many years of a Cold War, and suddenly we have China as our most favored nation, or trading status nation sort of thing. And no one asks why, what happened there. And literally, I can remember on the news when it was announced overnight that China would be trading with the West. And interviewed the man in the street in China, and he says, he said, capitalism good mixed with communism, capitalism good mixed with communism. And he got it right, didn't he? Discussing that what happens today was discussed an awful long time ago, to do with even the excuse they bring up for culling off the people, culling them down, getting them to accept sterility or basically birth control, which should be done through monetary means, etc. All that was discussed a long time ago with these groups that the Huxleys mixed in. And he talks about on that Mike Wallace interview about, the burgeoning population that will come down the road. And it wasn't just that. If you listen carefully to what he says, he mentions that it isn't just birth control, it's also death control. We should be looking more at death control. He said there's too many people living too long, you see. And people don't realize he was taking part, and his group were taking part in world meetings around that time of that interview with the United Nations and Department of Population Control. I always add the control because that's all it's about, is control, the UN. And they discussed how they'd bring these policies in. And they even discussed which countries they could bring it into first. And they even knew that they could do this probably with another communist-type system, like either Russia or China. And that's why they were so interested in China. Now remember, communism was based on evolution. It's based on science, that science is king, and that they could create new types of humans, better types of humans, to serve the system, serve the people. And they wrote books about it, how they could do anything by using psychology alone and types of indoctrination. You could create the perfect Soviet man. But they also went into breeding plans and processes too. Because after all science ruled, there was nothing else to hinder them. There were no religions to hold them back or complain. So they could go straight ahead with this great experiment and try all this stuff, you see. That's why, as I say, the Soviet-type system or communist system was chosen to be blended with the West. Because communism from its very inception was born in the West. It was born in London, England. And they called it, again, the Great Experiment. What you do with an experiment, you study it. You study it outside, where it's safer for you. In other words, those who studied it are already the elites of another type of system who have safely dominated that system. And they could study this system, go in and out, study it, and still make sure they had somewhere to run home to if they had to. But they've taken all the lessons from all that Soviet era. And remember, the United Nations has already declared that China is the model state for the world to emulate. Now, last night I mentioned Sir Crispin Tickell, a man with no sense of humor whatsoever. And I'll put a link up to a video that he did recently after going to China. And he says that China is doing all the right kind of things and blah, blah, blah. And he mentions what he's trying to tell you is it's not quite time to implement the same mandatory policies. It wouldn't just take off quite right or right now on the West. It wouldn't just wash down right now. But that's what they're working for, is to get us all to accept a maximum of one child per family policy, the same as Australia. Now remember, Tickell himself is another Huxley. Go through his genealogy. I gave the Wikipedia link last night. And he goes way back through the Huxley line, through the female side of his family. And he's just as fanatical as old Sir Thomas Huxley was, the best pal of Charles Darwin. And I'm sure he believes in all that too, completely. That the survival of the fittest and special people and inferior people. But he used to say, he puts China up as the model state of the world. Now, 20 years ago, you could not have come out and said that in public, because we hadn't been conditioned to accept it. But we have been conditioned in the last 20 years. And that is, again, a technique used by the Bernays type characters, the guys who give us cultures for each era. A well-known science amongst the few. After all, they don't want the public to know how it's done to them, how your thoughts are given to you, how the things that you fight about are given to you, the things you argue about, even your hobbies are pushed on you and authorized from above. Like keep fit, go cycling, all that stuff. That all came from above, you see, for other reasons. These are authorized, safe pastimes for you. All coming from the top, from those who know how to create culture, update it, alter it, and swing it off in a different direction. And remember, too, when you want to make a massive change from culture to culture, you must destroy completely the old culture. Everything that held it together and held community together had to be completely and utterly destroyed. Everything. I mean demolished. And that's why, since the 60s onwards especially, there was a massive attack by a well-funded entertainment industry. And by that I don't mean just Hollywood, not only Hollywood, but all of the big media companies, to radically alter the culture in the West, destroy it, until often you can't tell the difference between males and females anymore by the way they act or walk or curse and swear. It's got that bad. Or even care. Women used to be very caring. It's tough to find it now. You'd find lots of tough women now. What's happened? They were worked on. Back with more after this break. Alan Watt, and we're cutting through the matrix, discussing the lineages, really, where they come down through time, always with the same speciality in the family. It's never lost. They don't deviate off into another field of science or whatever. They're always into the same agenda as their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. And they also seem as psychopathic as the previous ones. Now, of course, if you're inbreeding psychopathy, then of course they're going to be psychopaths. That's something that really Plato talked about, how they could create certain types for rulership, people who would be stern, people who could make decisions rapidly and never regret making them. It's interesting, too, that to be a Rhodes Scholar, remember, a Rhodes Scholar is set up to go to Oxford in England under a scholarship which is designed to create world leaders for a united planet and so on. Going back all the way to the Cecil Rhodes Milner Group that became the Royal Institute for International Affairs. And when you come out of a Rhodes Scholarship, the doors open for you across the planet. You just walk through from then on. You're guaranteed leadership positions in different countries. But, as I say, they like to use these big experiments, the great experiments they call them. The United States was called the Great Experiment too, to see if people could handle freedom. Handle it. Not just handle it, but hold on to it. Because if you look at history, there's always this dominant minority tries to take over again everywhere people go and grab all the wealth and the judicial systems, the legal systems, and run the politics. They were well aware of that in the 1700s. And therefore, it was up to the average person if he was ready to always fight for his rights. And I mean totally, completely fight in every means possible for his rights. Because otherwise, he'd lose them. And that's what the founding fathers basically knew. They knew. As Franklin said when he was asked what kind of government the people had been given, and that's very telling in itself, that the people had been given, they didn't take part in it. It was a small elect group of Freemasons that did it. And Franklin said, a republic, if you can keep it. That's what they meant, if you can keep it. Now, what the elite have always known is you spoil the people a little bit, you let them graze and be happy, and non-involved in what's happening in politics, and you can gradually take over again as they're grazing in the fields and having fun and frolicking and all that stuff. And that's what happened in the U.S. very quickly, in fact. And now you're seeing the end product as they go into this next phase of the totally controlled planet, because the dominant minority in the U.S. have been running the U.S. for an awful long time now and pushing across the planet for this united world system. A planned society with a planned population, and even going all the way to what kinds of people they would breed, exactly along the lines that Aldous Huxley wrote about in Brave New World. The ones that would breed special people to serve them all the better, just like Plato talked about in the Republic. Every one of these elitists loves Plato's Republic. They all mention that it was their favorite book. Here's an article here to show you where it's going to, since China is the model state for us all to emulate. And this is from CNN.com, August the 5th. This is Chongguang, China, CNN. At the Chongguang Children's Palace, experts are hoping to revolutionize child rearing with help of science. That's standard communism, you see. About 30 children aged 3 to 12 years old and their parents are participating in a new program that uses DNA testing to identify genetic gifts and predict the future. When director Zhou Mingyu first heard about the technology earlier this year, he instantly knew it could be a success in China. Nowadays, competition in the world is about who has the most talent, said Zhou. We can give Chinese children an effective scientific plan at an early age. Now listen to this. It says the test is conducted by the Shanghai Biochip Corporation. A biochip corporation, eh? Scientists claim, I love how they claim things, a simple saliva swab collects as many as 10,000 cells that enable them to isolate 11 different genes. By taking a closer look at the genetic codes, they say they can extract information about a child's IQ, emotional control, focus, memory, athletic ability, and more. Then they say, well, for basketball, they can test for height and other factors, said Dr. Huang Xinghou, a leading scientist on the project. We're also test listening ability so they can tell us if the child might be talented at music. DNA testing has been used more widely to determine susceptibility to genetic disease. The test can identify mutations in the genetic code that can or can lead to certain disorders, allow parents or patients to assess risk levels and decide whether they want preventative treatment. Well, what they're telling you there is they already use it for abortions. That's also happening in the West. Your child might have this or it might have that. I've read articles here where mothers were advised to have abortions and their children were perfectly normal. I wonder how often that goes on, eh? It says, for example, the test can identify cancer genes that may make a woman more likely to develop breast or ovarian cancer. May make. I love these, how they always give themselves an exclusion or an exclusive way to get out of it. Some women have decided to have a mastectomy based on DNA test results and family history, but according to Chinese scientists, this is the first time the test is being offered to children in China to help discover their natural talents. For about $880, Chinese parents can sign their children up for the test, and 5 days of summer camp in Chongqing, where the children will be evaluated in various settings from sports to art. The scientific results, combined with observations by experts through the week, will be used to make recommendations to parents about what their child should pursue. Now remember, under the Soviet system, they were the first ones to come out too with school to work. That's what communism is about. To try and detect, long before this article, years and years ago, they were talking about they gave children IQ tests, etc., psychology tests, and they would decide if you were going to be a plumber or a teacher or a scientist. They've been doing that for an awful long time. So this is the latest part of their arsenal, is the DNA testing may be able to tell them what your child should really be. But what a beautiful way, too, of getting a planned society, isn't it? In this way, under the guise of this, you can tell the public whatever you want according to your needs. You might say, well, for instance, we need another 1 million paddy field workers for rice in 20 years. So just tell the next bunch that they're all very low sort of grade, physical, tough, but peasants basically, and we'll get all the paddy field workers. That's how you can do it. Doesn't have to be true, does it? I mean, when has truth ever come into eugenics? Never, never, ever. And when has truth ever come into political mandates? Doesn't come into it at all. This is the planned society they're after here, where they can plan what they want. So many engineers, so many of this, so many of that. That's really under the guise of DNA testing. And again, it's a beautiful way out too, because what do you do when you're at low grade and you've been given a job to sweep up the streets at night? Well, I guess nobody could help it. It was my DNA. It was my DNA. I got bad DNA. See, you won't blame the guys at the top that gave you no chance. That blocked all your chances, in fact. That classified you with the class D or E or F stamp. It's down to fate, isn't it? Oh, well, just DNA. And you'll believe it. So as Dr. Huang said, the testing can even help project careers down the road. Well, as I say, China is a model state for the world. So shortly you'll be seeing it here. Now it's wonderful too that they go on about the one child per family policy in China. I read an article not too long ago where China had altered it for the wealthy families. They can have more than one child, which again is eugenics policy, because why breed inferior types? The Huxley said that too, and Mr. Tickell's all about that as well. Why breed inferior types? Why not? I remember Charles Galton Darwin, he said our biggest fear back in the 1950s, the grandson of Charles Darwin, he said our biggest fear, meaning the elite's biggest fear, was that the peasant class, the unworthy types, would outbreed the better class. That was his biggest fear. They're all for this kind of stuff, but what a great tool. Science has deemed you class F. And then you're out. That's it. Now, since when should science? Remember, science is a self-interested body. And like all self-interested bodies, it tries to promote itself as being superior to everything else around it. And there's been so many lies told in science, and even within competing branches of science, all competing for the top powerful positions, that you can't believe anything they say, especially when it's to do with social policy. Should they be involved in social policy? No. No, they should not be involved in social policy. It's supposed to be up to the people, if we truly had any kind of democracy, to decide what kind of policies should be mandated over the people, over themselves. When you hand it over to so-called scientific elitists and specialists that are outside of your realm, you're now undemocratic, because they have their own agendas according to what they've been taught. And all these sciences now that are on the boards of political boards across the world, parliaments and congresses and so on, advising them, are all taught the same stuff. Eugenics, the need to depopulate, global warming, a man's a curse on the planet, he's a virus on the planet. That's their mandate, which doesn't sound terribly scientific to me, but it's definitely an agenda. Definitely an agenda. They're all on board with the same pablum. And it is pablum, pure pablum. I've mentioned before about other people who've talked about the other evidence that the world is not warming up and that man's got nothing to do with it. And geologists keep trying to talk and say, look, we're the experts in this, because they study earth changes. They study the layers of rock and ice and snow and all the rest of it, and they can tell through many ice ages, many warming periods, in times when man wasn't even around, so man had nothing to do with it. But you see, that doesn't go well with the political agenda of depopulation, which is really what this is all about. It's a political, eugenical mandate. So facts don't count. Hype and fear and hysteria count, but facts do not count. Do you realize we're supposed to be under every little island in the Pacific and Caribbean and so on should have been underwater long ago, according to projections were given 30 years ago by the same characters at the United Nations. Oh, the sea levels are rising. No. They haven't. Not only that, many of these islands have got big brand new hotels being built right now on the shores and beaches because nothing's happened. They haven't sunk. They haven't lost any of their land. Once in a while, you've got an island that will go down somewhere because it's volcanic. And that's what happens after a while. They come up out the water and they go back down again. That's what volcanoes tend to do. But let's not bring facts into this equation. It doesn't work out with social policy by the eugenicists. There was a book published a while ago by a guy called Plimer from Australia, and I've read it before. But he talked about, he's got 60 academic papers on the subject of global warming, and he's got a book out called Heaven and Earth, Global Warming. The Missing Science draws together much of his previous work. It brings especially from a short history of planet Earth, which was based on a decade of radio broadcasts in Australia. That book, published in 2001, was a bestseller and won several prizes. But Plimer found it hard to find anyone willing to publish the latest book. So intimidating have the environmental lobby become. They're completely intolerant, this bunch at the IPCC, or IPCC, the United Nations. All these guys are not all scientists, by the way. One of the guys worked in a garbage dump. That's where he is now. He's working at the United Nations as a specialist. Getting back to Plimer, he says, but he did eventually find a small publishing house willing to take the gamble, and the book has already sold about 30,000 copies in Australia. Plimer presents the proposition that anthropogenic global warming is little more than a con trick on the public perpetuated by fundamentalist environmentalists and callously adopted by politicians and government officials who love nothing more than an issue that causes public anxiety. While environmentalists, for the most part, draw their conclusions based on climate information gathered in the last few hundred years, well, it's not even that, is it? Plimer says, have a time for stretching back his own geologists have a time frame stretching back many thousands of millions of years. The dynamic and changing character of the Earth's climate has always been known by geologists. These changes are cyclical and random, he says. They're not caused or significantly affected by human behavior. Polar ice, for example, has been present on the Earth for less than 20% of geological time. Plimer writes, plus animal extinctions are an entirely normal part of the Earth's evolution. That's true as well. Plimer, by the way, is also a vehement anti-creationist, as has been hauled into court for disrupting meetings by religious leaders and evangelists who claim the Bible is literal truth. So he's not religious either, this guy. He's a scientist. Plimer gets especially upset about carbon dioxide, its role in Earth's daily life, and supposed effects on climate of human manufacture of the gas. He says atmospheric carbon dioxide is now at the lowest levels it has been for 500 million years. And the atmospheric carbon dioxide is only 0.001% of the total amount of the chemical held in the oceans, surface rocks, soils, and various forms of life. Indeed, Plimer says carbon dioxide is not a pollutant but a plant food, which it is. Plants eat carbon dioxide and excrete oxygen. Human activity, he says, contributes only the tiniest fraction to even the atmospheric presence of carbon dioxide. There's no problem with global warming, Plimer says repeatedly. He points out that for humans, periods of global warming have been times of abundance when civilizations made leaps forward. Ice ages, in contrast, have been times when human development slowed or even declined. See, that's what you have. If you've had so many ice ages, what happened between them? Well, they warmed. The planet warms between ice ages. Otherwise, you'd have one continuous ice age, right? But it's so wonderful that these fanatics at the top are going with a political agenda, and that's why they won't bring facts into the issue. And it's a political agenda dreamed up by others, including the Club of Rome, who say in their own book, The First Global Revolution, they looked for a way to unite the planet under a global governmental system. And they'd have to find a war of some kind. It's the only time we pull together, we do what we're told, we'll be governments that can use a heavy stick. And it says, we came up with the idea of global warming. That would fit the bill. That's the words they use in their own book. They're the premier think tank for this global society of elitists. Back with more after this break. Well, that last article was from the Vancouver Sun, July 29th, 2009, on the geologist Ian Plimer. It's well worth reading. I'll try and take a phone call now. I've got 3 up now that the satellite's working again. Damon from Maryland, are you there, Damon?
Yes, I'm here. Hello?
Hello, yes.
Hey, I love your show, man. It's so great. I listen every day. I just had a very simple question. You bring out all these different things about how everything is, they're doing all this deception, and all these different things are all, cloaks. But when is, it's going to be obvious, how is it all going to go down, when it's no longer a deception, it's right in your face, the guns, the black suits, the lights, the dogs. I live in the inner city in Baltimore. It's one of the worst, ghettos in the world where death rates are like the death rates in Iraq War.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just horrible. I live where John Hopkins is. I go to school there. We deal with SV40. We deal with H1N1 right in the laboratory. I'm just a kid off the street. They just let you. They train you with this biotech stuff. It's like they just give it away free. You can play with viruses. It's really crazy.
Yes.
And it's just a disgusting place. Really.
It is disgusting, and I'll tell you too. You have to read the books written by the guys in the culture creation industry, because they look upon things as long term. They actually know how long it will take for what they call a meme or an idea that they start off and push back through the media to be before they know how long it will take before the general public and all the different classes will start to repeat it. They know exactly when the bottom class will start to repeat it, and that means that's when they're ready to hear more for the next phase and so on. And you've got to read the books by people like Bernays on propaganda.
Yeah, I know about Bernays. I definitely look into all that stuff. I love psychology, social control.
Yes.
I have a friend of mine who goes to John Jay in, I guess, in New York, and they study that, and she's in corrections, and it changes her life. She becomes like an authoritarian at home as well as at work, and it's really crazy. But when is it just going to be right there? Because I see they put men and women in the same jails now, like right in the same bullpen. Men and women, it's like they're getting people used to just being locked down. And when is it just going to be? It's like something has to happen to people that's going to.
Oh, they will. I am sure. I'm positive. See, they're on a roll now on crisis creation, and it's building up to something. And when it's the right time, they will really give us something. And they're even looking for even up to 30 years of riots as they bring in this whole new order of depopulation, mandatory sterilization, etc. That's all on the cards, by the way, by the big think tanks.
It's 50% of black women get abortions. It's crazy. And they use the placentas in makeup and shit and stuff.
I know. I know. It's disgusting. The BBC did a documentary in China, the model state, where you could buy a fetus in the back door of the abortion room, and they're using it in soups and things to regenerate your virility. I mean, it's disgusting what they're trying to bring humanity down to, but the problem is it's working at the bottom levels.
What's going to happen? What's going to happen? Like, when is it just going to be everybody's going to know and see it? Like,
yes.
Is it going to be
It'll
like
be decision time.
Red Dawn or something? When is it going to be? Hitler. When is he coming back? That's what I'm asking.
That's it. That's it. And really, we've got to reclaim it one by one ourselves and start saying no to all of this, regardless of what becomes popular opinion. Popular opinion is conditioned opinion. That's what Bernays said. So we've got to take back all the rights by ourselves, for ourselves, and everybody's got to stand up and say no more agendas, unless the public are let in on it and we plan our own future.